Personality tests are everywhere, whether it is career advice or online quizzes. Raise your hand if you've ever taken a personality test before. As we can see, many of us here tonight are familiar with personality tests. The Myers-Briggs company reports that 88% of the Fortune 500 companies uses the MBTI to assess the personality of their employees. I used to be a big fan of the MBTI. I would click on every single article of my type, ENFPs. I would read my personality descriptions over and over again. I watched YouTube videos of the strengths and weaknesses of my type, and I even put in my Instagram bio. I was convinced that the word ENFP could explain everything about me. But as I began to dig deeper, something did not quite sit right. How can a four-letter word so accurately represent who I was? And it turns out that it cannot. The MBTI, short for Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, is a self-evaluated personality quiz that sorts people into 16 types, each type represented by a four-letter code. And each of these letters represent two sides of personality. The first one, extroversion or introversion. How do you gain your energy? Do you gain it from the outside world? Or do you recharge by being alone? The second one, sensing or intuition. How do you take in information? Do you focus on the facts and details? Or do you see the big picture? Thirdly, are you a thinker or a feeler? Do you take a much more objective view, or do you like to take a more empathetic approach? Lastly, judging or perceiving. Do you prefer long lists and plans, or do you just simply like to go with the flow? This seems like a really neat way to sort people into groups, by splitting them into dichotomies, or two sides of personalities. However, it may not work too well in real life. Imagine this. You're at a party, and since you don't know anyone there, you'd rather sit alone in a corner and spend time with yourself. However, when your group of friends arrive, all of a sudden you're all chatty and loud and enjoying yourself around people. The question is, does that make you introverted or extroverted? The MBTI will force you to choose. However, studies show that most of us fall somewhere in the middle, and depending on the situation, we're never strictly one side or the other. Yet the MBTI insists on locking us into rigid categories. And to make that work, there's deliberately an odd number of questions, just to avoid someone from scoring 50-50 and landing right in the middle. So while the MBTI tells you, you're a thinker and not a feeler, you could very well be both, because it's not possible to force something fluid like our personality into a rigid form or shape. In fact, an experiment shows that only after 5 weeks, up to 50% of the participants can get a totally different result. If our type can change so quickly, does it actually represent who we are? The issue specifically of MBTI lies in its categories. The MBTI was created by Catherine Briggs and her daughter Isabel Myers around the time of World War II. They based their test on Carl Jung's theory of personalities based in his book, Psychological Types. Jung believed in 3 dichotomies only, as the judging and perceiving dichotomy was added uniquely to the MBTI. He believed in 4 types, so a person could be extroverted or introverted, plus another side of thinking, feeling, sensing, or intuition. What made Jung's theory different was that he believed in the mind's subconsciousness. So say, for example, you were an introverted feeler. You would still have a part of a thinker inside your subconsciousness. And that is something the self-evaluated MBTI cannot detect. In fact, these types suggested by the MBTI may not actually exist. For example, to show that ENFPs like me actually exist, we would see clusters of people in the population with high E, N, F, and P traits. But studies have failed to find these clusters, meaning that these types suggested by the MBTI do not actually represent significant parts of our personality. The deepest issue of MBTI is what it encourages us to believe. It can quickly go from empowering to limiting. I used to tell myself, I cannot keep my room clean, but that is just because I'm an ENFP. And although that may sound ridiculous to me right now, it shows how the MBTI stop us from trying to work on our flaws, but instead, we dismiss them as unchangeable parts of our personality. And life is so much harder when you're constantly telling yourself, you can't do this, or you aren't good at this, that's just the type of person you are. Moreover, by blaming wrong decisions on your type, you may be disregarding why you made the mistake in the first place. For example, you might be overthinking because you're stressed and anxious over something, and not because you're an INFJ. At this point into the talk, you might be wondering, well, why does the unreliability of MBTI even matter? And maybe you're not interested in personality tests and find this a bit irrational. However, all of us here tonight might be affected by a similar issue. We often label ourselves with who we are, what we can or cannot do, what we think and what we feel, as if we love to give a name to something we're uncertain of, especially when it comes to what we think. These labels we put on ourselves are not unique to the MBTI. Horoscopes and astrology, fortune-telling, and even relating to memes on the internet are examples of the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect is our tendency to take in vague and generalized information to be uniquely applicable to ourselves, even when they only represent a very tiny portion of our lives. It can happen so commonly because it feels nice for our beliefs to be validated and related to by others. However, the danger of this is that we will actively take on other people's opinions instead of our own. Over time, these labels will leave us feeling stressed and anxious, and more susceptible to believing in more false information about ourselves in the future. While the unreliability of MBTI may seem harmless, it reflects something deeper. How we let these names, these types, these labels tell us who we are, while we neglect our own values and beliefs. But taking personality tests for fun could never hurt. For example, the Big Five is another personality test that emerges from analyzing how we describe ourselves and others around us. And studies show that it's way better at predicting behavior because it measures us from a spectrum and not just types. So the next time you see a personality test, go ahead and take it. Have fun with it. Share the results with your friends, but don't let it tell you who you are. Instead, focus on what makes you truly you. Your actions, your growth, your perceptions, and your views. Because none of these tests will know you the way you know yourself. Labels, like the MBTI, are trying to put you into a box. But the truth is, you were never meant to fit in one. Thank you.